Hi guys, this is Mike. In this Cinema 4D tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do an artificial intelligence AI character effects. If you've ever seen the movie Matrix Revolutions, there's a scene at the machine city where a bunch of little machines make up the face of the AI. I'm going to do the same thing except I'm going to be using cubes. Now I'm going to set up this tutorial in 4 parts: the modeling of the scene and the machine, the character modeling, and then the character animation. And then after that, I'm going to do the lighting and rendering for the final lesson. So open up Cinema 4D in a new document, and I'm going to make, first I'm going to make a cube, and this is going to be the basic floor and walls of our little scene. So I'm going to stretch this out, make it a lot larger, and then make it editable. Go to polygon mode, and I'm just going to delete these first 2 polygons. In order to help me keep track of where I'm going to be putting everything, I'm going to make a camera, look through the camera, and then look out, and then just pull back a little bit. And then I'll know, once I start merging in these other parts, I'll be able to know exactly where things are going to be in the camera view. So I'm going to go back to the cube and delete this top one. I'm going to have some lighting coming up from the top. Next, I want to make the machine, which is going to make the character effects. So I'm going to go to a cylinder and bring this down, and I'm going to go to object mode, and I'm going to go to NB on the keyboard to bring up lines. And I want to make this a bit larger, maybe a bit smaller as well. And I want to add some height segments. So I'm just going to put a bunch in. I always try to make the polygon square as best I can. Oops. And just kind of adjust this just a little bit. Okay, caps. I don't really need the caps, so I'm just going to turn that off. And I'm going to make this editable. I'm going to go to line mode, UL on the keyboard, and that's going to give me loop selection. I'm going to select this top loop, and D on your keyboard is going to bring up extrude. I'm going to left click and drag to the right, and then T on the keyboard, I am going to shrink that down just a little bit, maybe about here. D on the keyboard again, extrude. With the directional tool, I'm just going to pull this all the way down. Now going on the opposite side, UL on the keyboard, D for extrude, T, and shrink this in, pull this in just a little bit. Now this is going to be on the bottom, so I'm not going to have to worry about too much about the geometry on this part. So I'm just going to click MD on the keyboard. This is going to bring up close polygonal hole. I'm going to close that. Now we do have these stretched out polygons. What I can do is put in some lines here so I have some better topology. So I can go to the loop, and I can put in a few, turn off restrict to selection, and just put in a few cuts. And I could do the same thing on the bottom as well. Okay, next I'm going to go to another cylinder, and I'm going to put that into a cloner. So I'm going to drop the cylinder into the cloner, and I'm going to go to Object tab, Radial. So if I don't want it in that plane, I want it in the XZ plane. Let's make this cylinder a little bit thinner. And back to the cloner, I only need 4. And let's pull this down a little bit. And increase the radius. And I can take off caps. I don't need caps. So I'll turn that off. And then next, what I want to do is I want to make another cylinder. It's going to be sort of the base of our machine. Zoom out a bit. And make the radius a little bit longer, a little bit bigger than the this top part. And let's see, I don't need caps, so I can turn that off. And let's get some more segments here. I think it's a little too much in the height, so let me drop the height down a bit. Reduce the segments. It's going through the floor. In fact, I'm going to put everything into a null. So select all of your parts of this machine. Option G. I'm just going to call this machine. And I can pull this up just a little bit. I think that's pretty good. So I'm going to make editable. And I'm going to go to line mode. I'm going to do something similar here. UL on the keyboard. D. And then transform. Pull this all the way in. And maybe give it a little bit more height. Let me zoom around. And I'm just going to close this hole. And I'll do something a little bit different here. I'm going to go UL on the keyboard. Let me zoom in. And I'm going to go D on the keyboard. T, shrink that in. D, pull that out just a bit, and I'm going to pull this down. D on the keyboard, and then T, I'm going to pull this out this way, and then D again, extrude. I'm going to pull this all the way down till it hits the floor. Let me zoom out a little bit. So let me shrink this a bit. D on the keyboard, and can't see because it's just a bit underneath the floor. Let me pull this up. Okay. Oops, wrong thing. And I'm going to pull this down, shrink it a little bit. Now what I can do is I can give this sort of like a lip. So I'm going to go to UL. I'm going to go to polygon mode. Select just this ridge. D on the keyboard. I can pull this out and then pull down in the directional tool. And I'll give it sort of a lip. Maybe I can put this and maybe D on the keyboard, maybe extrude that out a little bit. And I'll give a little bit more of an extrusion here. Not a big fan on how it's kind of coming out this way, so I'm gonna T on the keyboard. Maybe I can pull this in about there. I think that'll be okay. I'm just thinking in terms, because I'm going to be putting this in a subdivision surface. In fact, let me do that now just to show you. Click here for a subdivision surface. I'm going to pull the cylinder and put that underneath the subdivision. I'm going to put that back into the null. And you can see how it subdivides the geometry here. So let me zoom in a little bit, and you can see that lip. You lose a little bit of the hard edge based on how the geometry is, how close the lines are together. So what I can do is, I definitely want to have some tighter edges, sharper edges in this section here, and then in this top section here. So just so I don't confuse myself, I'm going to go base sub D, and this will be, that's just these poles, these posts at the top. So I can just name that posts, and then this will be the top, which I'll also put in a subdivision surface. So another subdivision, I'm going to drag the top, put this back into the null, and I'm just going to call top sub D. Make this similar. Okay, so now I want to tackle some of these edges. So I want to start at the top. I kind of like how that geometry is at the top here, at this hole. My thinking is that this is the area where the visual effects energizes the cubes in order to make our character face. So, but around here, I want it to be a bit of a sharper edge. So I'm going to go to top, and I'm going to go to line mode. Now I can turn off, to see the lines a little bit better. I'm going to, you can see the brighter lines. These are the lines of our geometry here. And if it helps you, you can just check this to hide the subdivision, or disable the subdivision. And if you bring K on your keyboard, it's going to bring up knife tool, and you can put a cut here and here. And if you go back to the subdivision, you can see how, if I turn off lines and go to object mode, you can see how this makes a more sharper edge. Okay, so I want to do the same thing on the bottom here. Let me bring back lines. And how sharp this is depends on how close the lines are to your original line of the edge. So let me go to line mode, and I'm going to do that similar. And I'll do something, same thing to this base as well. And I want to have a more sharper edge here. So I'm going to put two cuts there at the top and the bottom. Same for the bottom part. And let me turn on the subdivision. You can see that's a tighter, sharper edge. And I want to, this was something I was concerned about, and I want to take a look at this. Let me turn off subdivision for a second. And I can put in a cut here and at the top. Let me see how that looks. And sometimes I like to just do a render and see how that looks. Let me zoom out. Okay, that looks pretty good. This is probably going to get cut off in our camera view, but I do want to have the flexibility of being able to maybe zoom out in our camera view, and plus it's just kind of cool doing some of this hard surface modeling. And I'd like to show some of the subdivision surface, how you can start with a lower resolution and then smooth out using subdivision surface. And just real quick, if you click on subdivision surface, you notice you're going to have the subdivision in editor. It's by default, it's going to be 2, and in the render, it's going to be 3. So the higher that number is, the more subdivisions you're going to have. So you can bump this up so it's higher, but just be careful. Your viewport will slow down when you start getting into some very complex and multiple objects. So just keep that in mind. And you can bump this up if you need a little bit more resolution when you do the final render. Okay, so now that we have our base model, the next lesson that I want to, or the base machine, the next lesson what I want to do is do the character modeling. And I'm going to do it pretty simple, if just for example purposes, but you can, of course, use some more complex modeling. So I'll see you in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to create the model of our character. So go to Primitives, choose a sphere. Let me zoom in a little bit. And let's make this hexahedron. Size should be fine, except we're going to be changing the segments down to 12. And what I want to do is I want to change the shape of our sphere. So first let's make editable. And then we're going to use a deformer. We're going to use FFD, freeform deformer. And then we're going to put that underneath a child of the sphere. We can just name this character. Select the FFD and choose fit to parent. And I want to add in a few more grid points. So in order to change the shape of this, we'll go to point mode. And I'm going to select rectangle selection. Check unselect visible elements, make sure that's unchecked, and then check tolerance selection. So we're going to go to the side. F3 on your keyboard will bring up side view, and we're just going to basically just give this a bit of a shape to our character. We don't have to spend too much time on it. The idea here is just to give it a basic shape of a character head. And what I'm doing is I'm just selecting these points with the rectangle selection. With the only select visible elements off, it's going through to all the points on the other side. And we're just kind of giving it sort of a shape of like maybe a human skull. But really it could be any shape that you want to make. Let's give this a little bit more height. Okay, let me go to the front view. And I don't want to do too much in the, see, when you start making adjustments here, you're going to affect the middle line. So I'm going to leave that off for now, or I'm not going to adjust anything on the sides for now. I'm going to be doing that in sculpting. So now that we have our basic shape, we have to basically bake down our FFD settings, or FFD changes, I should say. So I'm going to select both FFD and character, and I'm going to choose not connect objects in the lead, but current state to object. And you're going to see it's going to make another object. It's going to make another model. So I'm going to deselect this, or hide this, our original freeform deformer, and go to character, and you can see that all the changes that we made using the freeform deformer are baked down into this model. So you can save this character if you want to work on it some more. I'm just going to delete it. And now what I want to do is I want to go to polygonal mode. Let's go to live selection. And I'm just going to select these two polygons here. I on your keyboard is going to bring up inner extrude, and I'm just going to pull this in, D, and we're just going to pull inward, and we're just going to give this character one eye. I'm going to select these polygons down here, not these two, just these ones here for the mouth, I for inner extrude, and then D, pull inwards. Okay, so now that we have our character, I want to give our character some expressions. And that will help affect all the cubes that we're going to put on in the next lesson. So in order to do that, what I want to do is I want to go to object mode, and then I want to go to, what I like to do is I like to make a copy of the character we just made. I want to hide the original, and I'm going to rename this character sculpt. Then I want to go to sculpting mode, or the sculpting layout. I want to subdivide. Now I'm going to be making expressions. So, and this, the geometry, how much resolution that we have on our character is going to play a big deal into how our character is going to look with all these cubes. So we want to give it some enough, we want to give it enough geometry in order to work with. So we're going to subdivide a few times. We'll go to 3. And we'll go to the grab tool. And what we'll do is we'll go to link symmetry. Make sure you're in the symmetry tab, link symmetry, and we'll use the X, Y, Z coordinates. So when you move your tool, it's going to affect both sides, no matter where you are with your tool. You can, that's represented with this white dot on the left side. So we're gonna have, since we're going with such high resolution, I need to make sure my my brush width is, or brush radius is pretty large. You can change that with the bracket key on your keyboard. So you can go back and forth in order to adjust the radius size. So in this case, I'm going to be making it quite large. And this will be our base, our default base for our character. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the tools and then go to create polygon copy. So if I go to objects, this objects tab, I can see it made another copy of our character. This is not going to be affected by our sculpt. So I'm just going to name this base or default, something like that. I want to hide this so it doesn't show up on my when I'm sculpting. Let's go back to the sculpting layers, and I want to add in a new layer. In this case, I'm going to name this happy, our happy expression. And I want to pull up just in the corners. And I'm doing this pretty quickly. This is going to be, I'm not going to, this is basically for example purposes. You can, of course, spend a lot more time with your character, a lot more time modeling your character. And we'll just kind of give this sort of a a happy, kind of almost dopey kind of looking expression. And give it a little bit more. So what I want to do next is I want to create another polygon copy. Go to Objects tab, simply name this happy. And holding down Option, you can click the traffic lights to hide your the polygon copy. So Option, double click will hide. So let's go back to our character sculpt. And I want to go back to base object and then make another layer. We'll name this angry. We'll just do 2 expressions just to and make sure you uncheck your happy expression, or the happy layer. And what I want to do is just kind of give this a furrowed brow, and let's pull this down and out a little bit. And let's pull these up, give it some real kind of attitude. Okay, and then let's affect the mouth a little bit. Make them look pretty mean. Okay. That looks pretty good. So tools, create polygon copy, objects tab, and I'll just name this angry. Option, double click on our traffic lights to hide that. And then we'll go to, I have to go back to sculpt. And then I think we're good here. We can continue to make expressions if you want. I'm just going to make this animation fairly simple. So go back to your startup layout. I want to hide our sculpt, and I want to unhide our base. So in order to make our characters animate, what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on our base, go to character tags, pose morph. Now this tag, we can choose a lot of different things that we want to manipulate. In this case, we're just going to use points. So select points, and you'll see in this tag we'll have edit and animate. We're going to be in edit mode, and we already by default have our base pose, and we'll have another pose already created. So we're just going to name this happy. And we'll add our expression to the advanced tab. Go down here, there's advanced section of our tag, and we'll have target. So what we're going to do is with happy selected, we'll pull our happy model that we created, We'll pull that into target. You can see already it jumps up and makes the happy expression. And we can adjust that with the strength. Now we're going to make another pose, and we're going to make this angry. And with that selected, and for our target field, we're going to pull in angry. And you can see that expression has changed. Now that we have this, I want to select everything that we made for our character. I want to Option G, and I'm just going to name this character. Let me select the, go back to the base, select the character pose morph tag, and when we want to animate our character, we go to the animate mode, and you can see we have happy and angry, and they're both at 100%. So we're just going to pull this back down so that we're at our default expression. Okay, so I think that's everything that we need to do in this lesson. In the next lesson, what I'm going to do is I'm going to then start bringing in the effects for our character and the cubes, and then we'll start doing an animation. So I'll see you in the next lesson. Okay, in this lesson, I'm going to be doing the animation part. So now that we have our character and the expressions, we have our base that we can start animating. Now, what you can do is when you have the base model and our character pose morphs tag selected, you can drag the happy field into your viewport and have a slider that you can then use to animate your character. When doing character animation, it's very helpful to be able to quickly get to your animation sliders and start making expressions. So you can drag this into your heads-up display into your viewport. Now, in order to move this around, you can just use Control on your keyboard, Control click and drag. And you can do the same thing for your angry slider. Now, if you select, if you unselect your base, then you're going to lose your heads-up display. That's not a problem. If you go to select the tag again, you can right-click, and where it says show, you can have always, and you can do the same thing for angry. So now when you select off of that base and your pose morph tag, that'll stay there all the time. Okay, so now that we have that, we can use our slider and animate our little character. But in this case, what we're going to be doing is, instead of using just this geometry, we're going to be adding in little cubes and represent the character's face and character's shape of his face. So I'm going to go to primitives, choose a cube, and we're going to go very small. We're going to go about 5 for our size. We're going to go to MoGraph, Cloner, drag the cube in the MoGraph cloner, or cloner object. For mode, we're going to go to object, and for the object field, we're going to use our base, and we're going to drag that right into the object field. Now, for distribution, we're going to use polygon center, and we're going to give this a second for it to populate. Okay, so you can see our all the cubes are in the center of each polygon. Now, the way that I want to set up this animation is, my idea is that we have our artificial intelligence and it's being represented with these cubes. And we're going to make our character, our artificial intelligence, a pretty happy character, happy AI. And then we're going to have a glitch, something happens, and then that switches our artificial intelligence to more of an angry character. So I want to represent the glitch that affects these cubes. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use the plane effector. So I'm going to select the cloner, go to MoGraph, effector, and we'll go to plane. And right away, everything just goes crazy. We're not going to affect the position, so we can just uncheck that. And we're going to choose scale and rotation. And we're going to go to the fall off tab. So go to fall off, and we're going to choose box. Now what this is going to be able for us to do is affect the cubes that we're affecting a little bit more directly and a little bit more precisely. So I'm going to choose the size. We're going to choose the Y. We're going to make this real thin. Maybe something around here. And we're going to increase the size. Let me zoom around. Actually, F2 on your keyboard. It's going to take, excuse me, it's going to take a little bit. In fact, before I get started on this too much, what I want to do is I want to go to cube. I want to right click, and I believe I did this before in another tutorial, but what you can do is go to display. We'll add a display tag, select the tag, and have that checked, and we'll use lines. And for style, we'll use box. And what that's going to do is that's going to help us with our viewport. Having so many cubes and having so much resolution, I don't want to bog down the viewport too much, especially if you're doing this at home. I don't want to slow you down too much. So now that I have that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, and it appears that, okay, took a minute for this to take effect. But what I want to do is I want to make sure, let me go to plane. I want to make sure that this affects all the way through our model. So I'm going to increase the size. Size actually is okay in the X. It's really the Z that I want to add in a little bit more. A little bit more size. So let me go to F1. And you can see our display tag and how that's been used. It's already getting pretty slow. And what I'm going to be doing is moving this plane, this animation, from top to bottom. And I'm waiting for this to, okay, there we go. It's kind of still bogging down because there's so many cubes. Now, what I can do is I don't want it on a just straight all the way down. I want it on about like a 45-degree angle. So I'm just going to go to the plane, and I'm going to go to coordinates, and this is going to be affecting the banking. So I believe it's the banking. So let me go -45, and yep, -45 for the banking. You can see that we're not going all the way through, so I have to give that a little bit more. Let me go to the fall off and give that a little bit more size here, size in the X. Now let's go to the parameter tab, and let's affect the size. So we're going to drop this down say -1, just to see how that looks. And then for the rotation, just to give it a little bit more interesting look, we're just going to go 5 all the way through. And in fact, we can actually turn off this base now. So if you option click, you can select. Okay, so what I want to do is then make the plane effector a little bit larger. If you go to render region, you'll get these crosshairs in for your cursor. And if you click and drag, you can then see the render of just this small rectangle. You can see how the plane is affecting the cubes of our character. Now I want to select on the plane and go back to the fall off, and I want to just T on the keyboard and just drag this out a little bit more. You can see where the red area and where that's being affected. So again, let me go to render region, do a little cross section. You can see how that's affecting our cubes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate our plane effector just moving from top to bottom. So let me select the plane. We'll go to the transform tool, or not transform tool, the move tool. And what I'll do is I'm just going to bring this up in this band about right here. And I got about 3 seconds. I think I can bump this up to maybe about 5 seconds on my timeline. So let me pull this all the way out. And I'm going to animate this plane moving, say, around the middle of our timeline. So I'm going to select our keyframes here. And you can see that by the keyframe on our timeline. And let me pull around here so we can see this band. And I'm going to move forward in our timeline. And this is probably, that should be enough for us. So let me just pull this all the way down. And let me zoom around here just to make sure I'm all the way through our character. And I'm going to make another keyframe here. So you can see this animation, and you can visualize that with this line here, and you can see all these points that it's going through. The more points, the faster it's going to be. So we have a pretty fast motion. Now let me just push play. Now it's going to probably slow down because of our because of all the clones that we have. So it seems too slow. So let me give that enough. I want it to be noticeable that something's happened, something has been affected, and then it's going to switch from happy to an angry expression. So now that I have that, what I want to do is I want to go to maybe a little bit further from the first keyframe, and I want to select, make a keyframe by command clicking here on our post morph happy slider, and then move forward in our move a bit forward on our timeline, and then move this forward. Command click to set another keyframe, and you can see the animation as it's as it's moving. You can't really notice it too much because we have our display tags on. So I'm just going to do another render region, and you can see we have our happy face. Now I'm going to do the same thing to our pose morph. Well, first what I want to do is once the glitch happens or something happens, and then we have our plane effector slide through, I want to command click to set another keyframe for a happy, and he's going to go a little bit further, and then we're going to slide this all the way back down again. Command click to make another keyframe, and then scrub forward just a bit. Command click for our angry expression, and then slide this forward, and then command click again for our to make the angry expression. So let me move all the way forward here, and then we'll do a render region, and you have our you have our angry face. Okay, so now that we have that's all done. I want to put this into a null, Option G, and I'm just going to call this effects. So we have our animation, we have our model, we have our character model, and we have our expressions. Now in the next lesson, what I want to do is I want to start adding in some materials and lighting, and then we'll do a render. Okay, in this lesson, we're going to make materials, put in some lighting, and then we'll do some rendering. So one thing I forgot to do was rotate our character around before I started putting in keyframes. That's not a problem. When I look through the camera, I'm looking on the side of his face, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rotate around in order to get our front view. Now we have our scene, our wall and floor. We can just rotate that around. So just select our cube. In fact, it's a good time to just name this. You can name this scene or walls. Zoom this, rotate this around, so we have our background. So I guess I can start putting in some materials onto our background. Choose double click on your materials palette, and we're just going to select color, and we're not going to do anything too fancy. I just want to give this a little bit of a color. I'm going to bring this down to, we can experiment to see what will work best. So I'm just going to drag this onto our material, onto our scene. And also want to make some materials for our little machine here. So again, this is all very kind of subjective. Give this sort of an off-white. And I'm going to put this onto our base and our top. So let me go to our machine. top and base. And I'm gonna command click and drag. Double click on that, and we're just gonna make this maybe a darker color. And I'm gonna put that on our cylinder, our posts. Okay, so let me do a render region just to see what that looks like. Okay, that's fine, I guess. Next, I want to put a color for our cubes. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to go to color for now. And this also doesn't have to be all that. I'm going to keep it sort of like a neutral color because I'm going to be using some lights to give the scene some color. And I'm just going to command drag, double click on this knot, and just pull this down a little bit. And then I want to go to reflection for now and click on that. Actually, let me go to brightness, drop that down a bit, and mix strength, drop that down a bit as well. And let's make sure I put this onto our cube. And I'll just name this cube. This will be base. I believe this is our scene. And posts. Okay. Next, I want to bring in some lighting. So I'm going to go to lighting, and I'm going to bring in area light. I'm going to rotate this around to 90 degrees. Transform and make this a lot larger. E on your keyboard to drag this up. Select light, and we'll go to like sort of an off color here. And shadow, I will go to shadow maps soft. Next, I want to make another light. Actually, one more thing. I do want to give this a fall off, so we'll go to fall off, details, fall off, and inverse square, physically accurate. As you can see, the scene gets a lot brighter. So I'm going to pull this radius / decay value. I'm going to drag this down. And if you hold down shift while dragging this value down, you can get to where you want to be a lot faster. Now let's do a render region. Just a cross section here just to see what we're looking at. That looks pretty cool. And next thing I want to do is I want to give it some lighting from the front. So I'm going to uncheck our camera for a moment. And I want to go to F2 on our keyboard. Bring in a light. And we'll go to general, go to an off color, off yellow, yellowish orange, shadow map soft, but we're gonna drag the intensity down to maybe 65. And I wanna pull this to the front. And I just wanna rename this front. And this will be our overhead light. Overhead. So select front. Let me go to the perspective mode. Let's go to right side mode, or view, excuse me. And let me zoom out. And I want to have the light kind of fill in and just kind of give him the front of the face a little bit more light. And what I also want to do is I want to put in another light. This one's going to be pretty much right center in our character's head. This one is just going to be, oh, you can just name this effects, character. And this is actually going to be very blue. So I'm going to bring this up around here. Intensity, we'll leave that for now. Now, I want to show you a few things here. First, we'll give it a shadow map soft. But what I want to do is I want to go to our perspective mode. And let me, with our camera unselected, I just want to do a render region. See how that looks. Okay, so what you're seeing is you're not really seeing the light come through too much, because if you notice, our cubes are so close together that you're not really, that light isn't coming through all that well. Although it does look pretty cool, we're going to give it a little bit of space in between our cubes. And I think the lighting is pretty good. Might be a little too bright for the overhead, but we'll take a look at that in a minute. So we have that. So I'm going to go back to the effects, and I want to give it a volume. So I'm going to go to visible light, and we're going to go to volumetric. And then I want to go to the cube, so select cube, and we're going to go to, I think probably 4. We might go down to 3, but 4 is probably going to be pretty good. So we'll go to 4 in size for our cube. And let's do another render region. And now you're starting to see that light kind of come through, and you can see a lot of that light kind of shining through. I still feel like the light is a little bit too bright. So I'm going to go to the overhead, and we're going to go to details, and I'm going to check this fall off. I want to see if I can get this down a little bit more. Might be a little bit too much, but let's give it another render region. Okay, now you're starting to get the effect that I want to see and how it's kind of coming through, but you still have that light from the top, but you have a little bit more almost sinister kind of look as these lights are starting to pour through these cubes. I want to see what it's going to look like if I bump up the intensity a little bit. Probably way too much. Let me go render region. That does look pretty cool. Okay, so now that I have that, we have our lighting, we have our effects light, our front view, our front light, our overhead light. We have our animation set for our character, and we have our machine base. Let's look through our camera. Do one more render region to see how we're looking here. That looks pretty cool. Now what we can do is we can start to look at some of the render settings. So I'm going to go 1280 by 720 for width and height. Anti-aliasing, I'm going to go to best. And just for this render purposes, I'm going to go to 1 by 1 for the minimum level, and max I'm going to go 2 by 2. And I'm going to add in an ambient occlusion. Now that's going to affect your render time. You'll notice some hit in the render time with ambient occlusion, but ambient occlusion is going to give you the lighting, the shadows in like little corners and edges. It just gives it that little bit of realism that I like. So I pretty much always use ambient occlusion when I'm doing a render. It just gives it a lot. It just gives it a lot more realism. But it does affect your render. So when you're doing testing, you want to keep that off. Same with the anti-aliasing, you want to keep that at none, just when in your testing phase. And so we have our output, save. Now when you're saving, what you can do is you can use QuickTime Movie when you're doing an animation. For short ones like this is totally fine, but when you're getting into some larger projects and you're starting to have larger animations, what I generally like to do is I like to use just one frame files, such as like a TIFF PSD. What that's going to do is when that renders out, you're going to have one frame, one document for each frame. So you might have, all these different frames, but if you have a problem, if something crashes, you don't have to start all over from scratch again. And what you can do is you can bring those into After Effects as a sequence, a TIFF sequence or PSD sequence, and then you can put that all together very simply and very easily in After Effects, and then render out that animation in After Effects. And you're going to be already doing some compositing in After Effects anyway. So that's just something that I like to do. So we'll just keep it at QuickTime Movie. And then output, you just want to make sure that you have all frames, or if you only want to do a cross section, or just like maybe you just want to see the beginning or the end, or some point you can put in exactly what you want to use. Now I have at seconds, and that's how I have it in my timeline. That helps me a little bit to get my head around a timeline and have all those frames. You can change that in your preferences. If you go to Edit, Preferences, and I believe it's Units. Yes, Animation. You want to go to Units, Animation. I have it set at seconds. You can have it go back to frames, which I believe is default. Cinema 4D is default. And you can see how that goes back to frames. So it's just, your preference. And I usually go back and forth between seconds and frames. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video as this renders, and we'll take a look at the final render and if there's any adjustments and comments after I render. So here's the final render. I have everything that we worked on, we rendered. You can see the one thing that I don't like is, you can see how the plane effector has gone through. And the one thing I don't like is that you can't really see the machine all that well. You can maybe make that a little bit smaller, zoom out a little bit, and reveal a little bit more of the machine. One other thing that I noticed is that when it gets to the angry view, because the geometry has been stretched out from when I did the sculpting, it does have some of these gaps right here above his brow, and that's something just to be conscious of when you're doing some of the sculpting, and keeping in mind how much the polygons are being stretched out. You might have some of those gaps. This is like one of the things that I don't particularly like, and you can spend a little bit more time getting that a little bit more perfect. I do love how there's little tiny gaps in between each one. You can make that a little bit larger by adjusting the cube size, and I had it set at 4 centimeters, but it doesn't have to be that round number. It could be 4.3, and you can adjust that according to your liking. Even maybe make it a little bit smaller. So I pretty much like how everything turned out. The only thing that I didn't think of is like when that glitch happens, once this kind of goes through, I could have had maybe the lights blink on and off. More of a visual representation that there's a glitch, something has happened, and now this AI character has turned angry or evil or whatever. So I hope you took a few things from this tutorial. Again, it's just an example. You can do a lot different. You can make the machine a lot different, make the background a little bit more interesting. I didn't want to get too bogged down in the details as much as get into the visual effects part of it. Again, the character head can be much more elaborate, and it would look pretty cool with having some more details in the facial expressions. Just keep in mind that because you have the cubes there going around it, and like I said, we're stretching out polygons. Just keep that in mind. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more tutorials. Thank you.